"Mommy, I want to go home," a young boy cried right in the middle of a time of silent prayer one Sunday morning. "Mommy, I want to go home," he insisted. As Mummy's face got redder and redder, and the congregation began to chuckle, I brought that silent prayer quickly to an end. His words, however, struck a chord within me, and it reflected a cry that is deep inside everyone, young and old alike. God, I want to come home. We hear it in the one called the prodigal son. We hear it in parents who bring their children to be baptized, even if they haven't been a part of the church for a while. Hear it in the person who returns to church after a long absence. They don't know why, really, they've come back. It's just something seems to be missing, and they thought they'd give church a try again. We hear it in the one who's always asking questions and seeking answers to those tough questions of life in this crazy world of ours. We see it in those who respond to some inner calling that urges them to work for world peace somehow, or to support a prisoner just released from prison to help them get a good start on life again. We hear it in a family who turns to the church in a time of crisis. A number of years ago now, I had a phone call come in, and I was asked to go to the hospital to be with a woman who was dying. When I got there, her husband explained to me that he'd grown up in the church I was serving at the time, but neither he or his wife had had anything to do with the church for years and years. He didn't know why, but it just seemed right to him that a minister would be present, the church would be present while his wife died. Deep within us, within all of us, is the younger son saying, God, I want to come home. Unfortunately, there are times when we can be more like the older son. He responded to the elaborate party given for his brother who had returned with anger. And sometimes we're a little bit like that. We respond with some anger, some resentment, some suspicion. When we see others trying to return to God, where were they all those years when we've been busy supporting the church with our efforts and our money? They'll never stick it out. They must want something. Let me see how sincere they are, and if they seem sincere, eventually I will welcome them then. Such are the responses of the older son within us. The father, however, responds to his returning son, running out to meet him with arms stretched. He puts a magnificent robe on his son. He gives a lavish party. And the curious thing about it is that the father does all this without knowing the real motivation as to why that son returned. Well, the son did say he was sorry, but he had rehearsed the words, which sound a little suspicious. Did he really mean he was sorry? Or was he sorry he couldn't live that way anymore because he ran out of money? And even if that younger son was sincere, Would he, once his stomach was full and the party was over, would he really be able to stick it out, or would he return to his wayward ways? The father didn't know the answer to any of those questions. All he knew was that his son had returned, and that was enough. No questions asked, no proof required, no guarantee for the future needed. The challenge for us is that God calls the church to respond to others in the very same way. We are called to those who are trying in any way to return home to God the same way that the father did, not the older son. The surprising thing for us is that as we respond to others in that way, we will grow in knowing that God responds to us while we try to come home to God. No questions asked, no proof required, no guarantee for the future needed. As we forgive others, as we welcome others without knowing their motivation for coming back to church, as we help those trying to change the way they live their lives, with no guarantee that they'll actually be successful, we end up being blessed as well. We are encountered by how God treats us, individually and as a congregation. We are forgiven before we even ask. We are welcome home and embraced by God's love, even in those times when we can't feel it. It's always there. We're given one more chance to follow the way of Jesus, but that one more chance is given over and over and over and over and over again. As we are blessed in these ways, then we in turn are further blessed to treat others the way the loving Father did in the parable. We are empowered by God to reach out with welcome and compassion and care as we respond to the hurting, the dying, the lonely, the desperate, the person who has made a major mistake, the person who's so lost they don't know what to do. They might even know they are lost. We are empowered to support emotionally and sometimes with our money. We are empowered to extend friendship. We are empowered to risk being let down. We're empowered to give of our time and energy and money without any guarantee that we'll ever see the results of our efforts. We will be woven into the fabric of God's unconditional love and welcome, which we see portrayed in the parable of the loving, welcoming Father. I looked at the tiny clock on the ledge on the windowsill beside his hospital bed. It told me it was time to say my goodbyes to John, not his real name, and be on my way to the other visits I had planned for that afternoon. John had lived for well over 10 years in an extended care hospital. He'd got to the point where he no longer could walk. His hands were so gnarled he could barely feed himself. And his voice had weakened to a whisper. We shared a brief time of prayer, and I stood to make my way out of the hospital and on to another visit, when suddenly he whispered, "I have a question to ask you. Can God even forgive me?" I slowly sat down. "I did something terrible as a young man. I don't suppose God could forgive me for that." We talked quite a while about God's love and God's forgiveness. I tried to assure him that there was nothing for which God won't forgive us. And there's no one that God won't forgive. "Even me," he finally whispered, with a sense of peace that had evaded him literally for decades. The interesting thing for me was that as I left that hospital that day, I noticed I had an added spring in my step and a smile on my face and a peace within. I had been reminded that God welcomed even me. "Mommy, I want to go home." Know that God is waiting, always waiting to welcome you.